I was still unpacking my boxes when my phone rang that night. My son's name lit up the screen, and without thinking, I smiled. I thought he was calling to check in, maybe to ask how I was settling into my new home. But instead, he said something that made my chest tighten so hard I could barely breathe. "Mom, move to the guest room. We're bringing my wife's whole family to the beach house. If you don't like it, I heard there's a nursing home down the street." At first, I thought it was a joke. Who talks to their mother like that? But he wasn't laughing. His voice was sharp, distant, and full of something I'd never heard from him before: entitlement. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, surrounded by half-open boxes and the sound of the waves outside, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. I'd spent 43 years building a company from scratch, surviving the loss of my husband, and raising that boy on my own. Every late night, every missed holiday, every sleepless morning, I did it all for him. And now, in the house I'd bought with my own hands and hard work, he was telling me to move out of my own bedroom. My name is Patricia Morrison, and I'm 68 years old. I thought retirement meant peace, long walks, morning tea, and quiet sunsets. But peace, I learned, isn't something you reach. It's something you have to protect. I could have cried that night. I could have begged him to respect me. But after everything I'd survived, I wasn't about to let anyone, not even my own son, decide where I belonged. Have you ever sacrificed everything for your family, only to be treated like you no longer mattered? Have you ever realized too late that the people you raised forgot who raised them? Because that's what happened to me. But instead of breaking down, I did what I've always done best: I made a plan. So before you judge what I did next, stay with me until the end. And if you've ever been taken for granted by someone you love, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about remembering who you are, and never letting anyone take that from you. When people talk about success, they rarely mention the price you pay for it. For me, the cost was time, the kind you can never buy back. I was 25 when I married Robert. He was kind, full of ideas, and believed life would always sort itself out. I believed him, until the day it didn't. He died of a heart attack at 47, leaving me with a mortgage, a 10-year-old boy, and $3,000 in savings. The night after his funeral, I sat at the kitchen table staring at a stack of bills I didn't know how to pay. David was asleep in his room, and I remember whispering to myself, "You can fall apart tomorrow. Tonight, you make a plan." I started small, a job as a sales representative for a medical supply company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and I was determined to be the best they'd ever seen. I didn't just sell equipment, I sold reliability. I listened, I followed up, I kept my word. Within a few years, I was their top performer. Still, that came with a price too. I missed school plays, birthday cakes, bedtime stories. David used to leave his drawings on my pillow because he knew I'd come home after he was asleep. Some nights I'd just sit by his bed, watching him breathe, telling myself it was temporary, that the hard work would pay off. "Someday, Davy," I'd whisper, "we'll have everything we need. You'll never have to worry again." And he'd mumble in his sleep, "Just be home more, Mom." That memory still cuts. But I kept pushing. I climbed higher at work until I realized I was doing all the heavy lifting for people who earned 3 times my salary. So I started my own business, Morrison Medical Solutions, out of a rented office that used to be a dry cleaner. It was chaos at first: unpaid invoices, sleepless nights, and endless coffee. But within 5 years, hospitals were calling me directly, asking for my company by name. I was proud, but I was tired in ways I didn't even understand yet. Still, when I looked at David, I told myself it was worth it: every hour, every ache, every sacrifice. By the time my company turned 10, I had 20 employees, contracts up and down the East Coast, and a reputation for never missing a deadline. But at home, my son was changing in ways I didn't want to see. He was polite, but distant, always busy, always needing money for the next big idea. I told myself it was a phase. He just needed time to find his path. So, when he struggled after college, I helped with rent. When he wanted to start a business, I co-signed the loan. When he got married, I paid for half the wedding because he said, "Mom, I can't do it without you." I wanted to believe I was helping him build stability. But the truth is, I was helping him depend on me. The company grew faster than I ever imagined. There were years I didn't see the ocean or take a single vacation. My body ached from the long hours, my hands stiff from typing, but I kept telling myself, just one more year, and you can finally rest. That one more year turned into 10. When I turned 68, the doctor warned me about my hip. "You've earned your retirement, Patricia," he said. "Don't wait until your body gives out." So I listened. For the first time in my adult life, I let go. I sold Morrison Medical Solutions, the company I'd built from nothing, for $4.2 million. After paying taxes, debts, and setting aside money for David's inheritance, I was left with enough to finally breathe. Enough to chase a dream that had been sitting in the back of my mind since the day Robert and I walked hand in hand down the boardwalk at Seabrook Beach, years before he died. He had pointed at a small cottage facing the water and said, "One day, Patty, we'll sit there every evening and watch the sun go down." He never got to. But I promised myself I would. So I found that beach. Not the same house, but close enough that when I looked out the window, I could almost see us there again, younger, laughing, hopeful. I signed the papers in mid-September. The realtor talked about renovations and upgrades, but I didn't care. I didn't want perfection, I wanted peace. As I stood on that porch with the keys in my hand, I thought, this is it. This is what 43 years of sacrifice has bought me. I had no idea how quickly that peace would be tested. The day I got the keys, the wind off the ocean smelled like salt and second chances. I remember standing on that porch, my hand trembling as I turned the lock for the first time. The door creaked open, and I felt a quiet kind of joy I hadn't felt in years, the joy of something that was completely mine. The house wasn't large or modern, but it had character. 3 bedrooms, white trim, old hardwood floors that groaned a little when I walked across them. The windows faced the Atlantic, and the sound of waves filled every room like a song I didn't know I'd been missing. The realtor warned me the kitchen was outdated. I smiled and said, "So am I. We'll get along just fine." I didn't care about marble counters or stainless steel appliances. I cared about the light that poured in every morning and the way the sea air softened everything it touched. I spent the first few days unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and giving life to the place. Every corner told a story. Robert's favorite chair sat by the window, the same one I'd saved through every move. I put our old photo on the wall above my bed, the one from our wedding day where he's laughing so hard you can almost hear it. At night, I'd sit on the porch wrapped in a cardigan, a cup of tea in hand, listening to the waves roll in. For the first time in more than 4 decades, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. I called David the day after I moved in. "Mom. That's amazing," he said. "You really did it. After all these years, you finally got your dream house." Hearing pride in his voice almost made me cry. It had been a long time since he'd sounded that way. "I want you and Vanessa to visit soon," I told him. "Maybe next month. I'll cook breakfast, and we can walk on the beach." He promised to check his schedule. I hung up feeling lighter than I had in years. For once, everything felt right, simple, calm, and mine. I didn't know it yet, but that peace had an expiration date. Moving in felt like closing the last chapter of a long, exhausting book. For once, I didn't have meetings to rush to or emails waiting after dinner. My mornings were quiet, just the sound of gulls and the slow hum of the ocean. I spent hours arranging small things, books, framed photos, the sea glass Robert used to collect during our walks. Every detail made the place feel more like home. At night, I'd light a candle and talk to him like he was still sitting beside me. "We made it, sweetheart," I'd whisper. "Not the way we planned, but we made it." The first week passed peacefully. I cooked simple meals, took short walks along the sand, and let my body finally rest. My hip ached, but in a way that reminded me I was still alive, still moving forward. One evening, the sky was streaked with gold, and the air had that crisp hint of autumn. I ordered Chinese food from a small place in town, the kind where they still write your order by hand. I ate on the porch, watching the waves. That meal tasted like freedom. As I loaded the dishes into the sink, my phone rang. David's name appeared, and I smiled again, just like always. "Hi, honey. You should see the sunset tonight." He cut me off before I could finish. "Mom, listen. Change of plans for next weekend." His tone was clipped, rushed, not the warm voice from our last call. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. "That's fine, sweetheart. We can pick another." "No, we're still coming," he interrupted. "But Vanessa's family is joining. Her parents, her sisters, their husbands, and the kids. So that's 14 people total." I froze. 14? "Yeah, we'll make it work. You've got 3 bedrooms, right?" I glanced around my small cottage, my quiet refuge, and felt something twist inside me. "I don't think that's a good idea, David. The house isn't ready for that many guests." He sighed, the kind of sigh that says he's already made up his mind. "Mom, it's fine. Vanessa's dad has a bad back, so you'll need to give them the master bedroom. You can take one of the guest rooms." My hand tightened around the phone. "You want me to give up my bedroom?" "It's just one weekend," he said sharply. "Don't make a big deal out of it. And maybe grab some good groceries before we come, lobster, steak, nice stuff. Let's make a good impression." The call went on, but I barely heard the rest. He spoke like I was an employee, not his mother. When the line went dead, I stood in that quiet kitchen with the phone still in my hand. The sunset that had felt so beautiful moments earlier now looked dull and cold through the window. That's when the ache in my chest turned into something sharper, not just pain, but awareness. After everything I'd done for him, after decades of working myself sick to give him a better life, my own son was treating me like an inconvenience. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood there, letting the silence fill the room until it steadied me. That was the night my peace turned into resolve. After that phone call, I didn't move for what felt like forever. The house was quiet except for the steady crash of waves outside. I kept staring at my reflection in the kitchen window, gray hair, tired eyes, and a look that didn't belong to the woman who'd built a life from nothing. 14 people. My son, his wife, her parents, her sisters, their children, all invited to my home without even asking. And the part that hurt most wasn't the number. It was the tone. The way he spoke to me, as if I owed him this. As if my entire life existed to make him comfortable. For years, I told myself that the distance between us was normal, that he was busy, that his silence wasn't rejection, just adulthood. But in that moment, I realized the truth. I hadn't just raised a man. I'd raised someone who thought I would always bend. I sank into the chair by the window, the one facing the ocean. It should have been peaceful, but I couldn't hear the waves anymore, only his words looping in my head. "Move to the guest room. If you don't like it, there's a nursing home down the street." My chest tightened, but no tears came. I'd cried enough in my life. This wasn't grief anymore, it was clarity. When Robert died, I promised myself I'd never let life corner me again. I'd built my strength one decision at a time, but I'd let love for my son blind me to how he treated me. That night, the truth was undeniable. He saw me as an obstacle, not a mother. I replayed our last real conversation before that call. The way he said, "I'm proud of you, Mom," when I told him about the house. I'd carried that line like a treasure. Now it felt like a trick my heart had played to keep me hopeful. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and I whispered, "You really think I'm going to step aside in my own home?" No answer came, but I didn't need one. That silence told me everything. He didn't know who he was dealing with anymore. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the tide and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Every sound reminded me that this place was supposed to be my peace, not a hotel for people who didn't respect me. I thought about all the things I'd done for David. The years of waking before sunrise, the long drives, the bills paid without complaint. The times I told him no one else would ever love him as fiercely as I did. And still, somehow, that love had turned into permission for him to take, to demand, to speak to me like I owed him the very roof over my head. By morning, the ache in my chest had changed. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was awareness, a cold, sharp kind that clears the fog. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the early light stretch across the water. That's when it hit me, I had built a company from scratch. I'd negotiated with men twice my age who tried to intimidate me. I'd survived the loss of my husband and the loneliness that followed. So why was I standing here letting my own child treat me like a guest in my life? That thought steadied me more than the coffee ever could. I stood, opened my laptop, and began typing. Not emails, lists. Contacts, phone numbers, reminders. I wrote down the name of a lawyer I'd met years ago at a business seminar. I searched for his office. I looked up property laws in New Hampshire. I checked my savings, not just the accounts David knew about, but the ones I'd quietly maintained all these years. Each small step calmed me. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. I paused once, glancing at the photo of Robert on my nightstand. His smile never changed, kind, steady, proud. "You tell me to stand tall," I murmured. "So I will." By the time the clock struck midnight, I knew what I had to do. I would not argue or plead when they arrived. I wouldn't try to earn my son's respect. That version of me, the one who explained, forgave, and hoped, was gone. If David thought I was too old to fight back, he was about to learn that age doesn't weaken resolve. It sharpens it. I turned off the light, settled into my bed, and whispered to myself, let him come. Because this time, I'd be ready. Morning came gray and cold. The ocean was rough that day, almost as if it was echoing everything I felt inside, restless, unsteady, ready to change. I woke before sunrise, made a fresh pot of coffee, and opened the curtains wide. The house looked different now. The same walls that had felt safe the week before suddenly carried a quiet tension. It wasn't the house that changed, it was me. I walked from room to room, touching the furniture I'd carefully arranged just days earlier. "This is my home," I whispered. Saying it out loud gave the words weight. I sat down at the dining table with a notebook and pen. Old habits from my business days kicked in. When things fell apart, I planned. The first call I made was to a law firm I remembered from my early years running Morrison Medical Solutions. The receptionist promised to have someone reach out first thing in the morning. I left a message that simply said, "Property and family matter. Urgent." Next, I contacted my financial advisor. I wanted every account reviewed, every automatic transfer double-checked. If David ever tried to access my finances, I needed to know where I stood. Then, I made a list of local services, security companies, contractors, even a locksmith. I didn't know yet which I'd need, but I wanted options. By the time I finished, the sun had fully risen. My kitchen clock read just past 8, but I felt like I'd already worked a full day. I poured another cup of coffee and looked out at the ocean. The waves were still breaking hard against the shore, relentless and loud. For years, I'd been that way too, steady, dependable, always there for everyone else. But I realized something important that morning. Strength isn't about how much you can give. It's about knowing when to stop giving to those who only take. I picked up my phone again, stared at David's name, and for the first time in my life, didn't feel the urge to call him. He wanted control. He wanted to walk into my home as if it was his own. Well, he was going to walk into something, just not what he expected. By late morning, I'd made every call I needed to. Each conversation stripped away the fear I'd carried since that phone call with David. With every name added to my contact list, attorney, advisor, local police, I felt the ground settle beneath me again. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was reclaiming the order. For too long, I'd let my son's needs dictate my every move. If he wanted help, I gave it. If he needed money, I found it. I told myself that's what mothers do. But somewhere along the line, he'd stopped seeing those sacrifices as love and started seeing them as obligation. That realization burned more than his words ever could. After I finished the calls, I sat quietly for a while. The sound of the waves drifted through the open window, and I thought about Robert, about how he'd always believed in my strength, even when I didn't. He used to say, "Patty, you're the kind of woman who turns problems into plans." So, that's exactly what I did. I opened my laptop again and began gathering documents, proof of ownership for the house, copies of my will, business sale records, and identification. Everything that established me as the rightful owner of this property went into one neatly labeled folder. I wanted no confusion when the time came. Before the day ended, I also wrote something I hadn't planned to, a short note addressed to David. It wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. It simply said, "Son, love built this house. Entitlement will not take it from me." I slipped the note into the folder and closed it. For the first time since buying the house, I felt calm again. This wasn't just about keeping a property. It was about keeping my dignity. As evening settled, I stood on the porch watching the horizon fade to gray. Somewhere out there, the waves kept breaking, steady, powerful, unstoppable. So was I. They were coming on Friday. And by then, every piece of my plan would be in place. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of steel and wind strong enough to bend the sea grass. I woke up before dawn, made my coffee, and sat for a moment in silence. My plan was ready. Every phone call, every document, every precaution had been set in motion. At 8 o'clock sharp, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, a man stood there in a dark coat with a leather briefcase in one hand. His gray hair was trimmed close, his expression calm but purposeful. "Mrs. Morrison?" he asked. "Richard Whitmore, Whitmore and Associates. You called about a property matter." "Yes." "Please, come in." Behind him was a younger woman carrying a laptop bag. "This is my associate, Jennifer," he added. We sat at the dining table, the one facing the ocean. It had become my command center. Richard opened his folder and spoke evenly. "I've reviewed the situation you described. From your account and your son's statements, what he's attempting could qualify as coercive control and potential financial exploitation. Under New Hampshire law, that's serious." I nodded slowly. "So I'm not overreacting?" He gave a small smile. "Not even slightly. What we're going to do is protect you, thoroughly." Jennifer placed several documents on the table. "This first one is a cease and desist letter. It formally warns your son to stop any attempt to occupy or control your property." Richard slid another paper forward. "And this is a trespass notice. It states that he and any guests arriving with him are not permitted to remain on this property. If they refuse to leave, the police will handle it." I took a deep breath. The idea of serving my own son with legal papers twisted something inside me, but I didn't flinch. "I want to do this right," I said. "I don't want shouting or chaos. I just want peace." "You'll have it," Richard replied. "When do they arrive?" "Noon." He looked at his watch. "Then we have time." Over the next 2 hours, we went through everything: signatures, witness forms, and a short statement in my own handwriting confirming I understood what I was signing. Jennifer made a few calls, her fingers flying across the keyboard. At 10:30, 2 cars pulled into my driveway. The first was Officer Maria Santos from the Seabrook Police Department. She stepped out of her cruiser, confident but warm. "Mrs. Morrison?" "Officer Santos. I'm here to ensure everything stays civil." "Thank you for coming," I said. "Ma'am," she replied, scanning the house, you'd be surprised how many parents go through this kind of situation. You're not alone. Her words settled over me like a steady hand on the shoulder. By 11 o'clock, everyone knew their role. The lawyer and his assistant waited near the hallway, the officer stood in the kitchen, and I sat in my reading chair by the window, calm, collected, and ready. They thought they were walking into a beach weekend. What they were walking into was accountability. At 11:45, I heard the sound of tires on gravel. Car doors slammed. Laughter, chatter, the thump of suitcases. My stomach tightened, but my hands stayed still on the book I wasn't really reading. Everyone ready? Richard asked quietly from the hallway. I nodded. The front door opened without a knock. Mom? We're here. David's voice carried through the house, confident, loud, the tone of someone stepping into property he thought was his. I didn't answer. Footsteps echoed down the hall, followed by Vanessa's voice. Wow, this place is smaller than I expected. They appeared in the doorway, David, holding 2 bags, and Vanessa, sunglasses perched on her head like she owned the place. Behind them, people spilled in, parents, siblings, children, dragging luggage across the hardwood floors. David frowned when he saw me sitting in the master bedroom. Mom, what are you doing in here? Didn't I tell you we needed this room? I looked up slowly. Yes, you told me. He blinked. So why are you still here? Before I could respond, Vanessa cut in. We'll just move her things. It's fine. That was when Officer Santos stepped into view. I wouldn't touch anything if I were you. The room went still. Vanessa froze. Who are you? Officer Maria Santos, Seabrook Police Department, she said calmly. And I'm here to make sure this visit doesn't cross into trespassing. David's expression darkened. Mom, what is this? You called the police on us? Richard emerged next, his tone polite but firm. David Morrison? I'm Richard Whitmore, Mrs. Morrison's legal representative. You've been formally notified that you and your guests are not authorized to remain on this property. He handed David a white envelope. David stared at it like it was on fire. This is ridiculous. She's my mother. Yes, I said, standing slowly, my voice steady, and this is my home. Mom, don't do this, he snapped. You're overreacting. It's just a family weekend. A weekend where I sleep in the guest room while your in-laws take my bed? Where I buy lobster so you can make a good impression? No, David. That isn't family. That's disrespect. His face reddened. You can't kick me out. I'm your son. Being my son doesn't make this your house, I said. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice sharp. This is insane. We took time off for this. We told everyone we'd be staying at a beach house. Officer Santos folded her arms. You can still stay, just not here. The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel like a verdict. David tried to laugh it off, but it came out brittle. You'll regret this, Mom. You need me. No, I said quietly. I needed you to respect me. That's all I ever asked. For a long second, no one moved. Then Vanessa's father muttered something under his breath and began hauling suitcases back to the car. One by one, the rest followed, muttering, glaring, avoiding my eyes. David was the last to leave the doorway. His voice dropped low. You're going to die alone, you know that? I met his stare and said, better alone than surrounded by people who don't value me. He turned and walked out without another word. The door shut with a heavy click. For a long moment, the only sound in the house was the wind pressing against the windows. Officer Santos exhaled first. In 20 years, I've seen a lot, Mrs. Morrison, she said, almost smiling, but I've never seen anyone handle it quite like that. I didn't want to fight, I replied softly. I just wanted peace. Richard gathered his papers and nodded. And you got it, the right way. Everything was documented, witnessed, and served properly. If your son tries to challenge it, he'll lose. Jennifer closed her laptop. You did the right thing. Most people never stand up in time. I sank into my chair, my legs trembling, not from weakness but release. The house felt different, lighter, calmer. It finally felt like mine again. Officer Santos stayed a moment longer, walking through the hallway to make sure the group was gone. If he comes back or tries to contact you in a threatening way, she said, call us directly. We already have this incident logged. Thank you, I said. When the last of them left, I walked through the house slowly, touching the door frames, the walls, the table where we'd signed the papers. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I didn't realize I'd lost. In the living room, the sunlight had started to break through the clouds. I turned toward the window and caught sight of Robert's photo on the wall. I could almost hear his voice, calm, proud, steady. I kept the promise, I whispered. A few minutes later, Linda Reeves, the real estate agent I'd called earlier in the week, poked her head through the doorway. Mrs. Morrison, just wanted to say, after what I witnessed, I don't think you'll be needing that condo tour. I smiled faintly. No, I think I'll stay right here. Richard stopped by the door before leaving. You did more than defend property today, he said. You drew a line. That matters. He was right. After everyone left, I stood on the porch and breathed in the salt air. The storm that had hung over the water all morning was breaking apart. The ocean looked calmer now, softer somehow, though I didn't trust it yet. It had its moods, same as life. I thought of David then, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet sadness. Maybe one day he'd understand what today meant. Maybe he never would. Either way, I was done waiting for his approval. As I locked the front door, I said aloud, this is my home, and I will never apologize for claiming it. For the first time in a long while, I believed it. When the last car disappeared down the road, I sat on the porch and listened to the sound of the waves. No shouting. No footsteps. No demands. Just the rhythm of the tide, steady and sure. For the first time since I'd bought the house, the silence felt like comfort instead of loneliness. I went inside and started cleaning up, not because it needed it, but because movement helped me think. I folded the spare linens, put away the extra dishes I'd set out, and collected the paperwork from the dining table. Every small act felt like closing a chapter. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Jennifer, the young lawyer who'd assisted Richard. Mrs. Morrison, Officer Santos filed the incident report and added your son's behavior to the system. If he ever tries this with anyone else, there'll be a record. You didn't just protect yourself today, you protected others, too. I read the message twice before replying. Thank you, Jennifer. You did more than your job today. Setting the phone down, I stood by the window for a long while. For 43 years, my entire purpose had been protecting my son, building a world where he could thrive. It had never crossed my mind that the best protection, for both of us, might be learning to say no. That night, I made dinner for one. Simple pasta, olive oil, garlic, and a glass of wine I'd been saving. I ate on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, watching the ocean stretch into darkness. The house no longer felt too big or too quiet. It felt earned. When I went to bed, I didn't double-check the locks out of fear. I did it out of habit, an old rhythm I wasn't ready to break. But when I turned off the light, the air felt different, lighter somehow. Peace doesn't arrive with applause. Sometimes, it shows up in the quiet moments, when you finally stop explaining yourself and let the world adjust to your boundaries. That night, I slept through till morning. The next morning, sunlight poured through the window, warm and steady. For once, I didn't rush to make coffee or check my phone. I just sat up in bed and let the light fall across the room. The ocean outside was calm again, its rhythm gentle and constant. I got up, stretched, and felt something shift in my chest, not pain, not regret, but relief. After breakfast, I walked to the mailbox at the end of the lane. My neighbors waved, asked how I was settling in. I smiled, answered politely, and didn't mention a thing about what had happened. Not because I was hiding it, but because it was over. On the way back, I saw Officer Santos's patrol car parked by the main road. She gave a small wave, and I nodded back. The gesture said more than words could. When I returned home, another message was waiting, this time from an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Morrison, this is Grace Chen, Jennifer's mother. She told me about what you did. My husband and I are in our 70s, and our son has been pressuring us to sell our restaurant so he can manage the money. After hearing your story, we decided to set up a trust. We wanted to thank you for the courage to take control before it's too late. I stared at the message for a long time, then smiled. I hadn't expected to inspire anyone. I just wanted to breathe again without feeling guilty for it. Later that afternoon, I took a walk along the shore. The sand was cool beneath my feet, the wind soft against my face. I thought about the life I'd built, not perfect, not without mistakes, but mine. In the days that followed, I joined a local book club, met women my age who had their own stories of family, love, and loss. We laughed, shared meals, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of belonging that didn't come with conditions. Every evening, I stood on the porch watching the horizon fade into color. The house had become what I always wanted, a place where I could live quietly, without fear of being replaced or dismissed. Sometimes, I thought of David. I wondered if he'd ever understand what that day really meant. But even if he never did, I'd made peace with it. He'd learn, someday, that love doesn't mean submission. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned. As the sun sank below the water, I whispered to the empty air, "You were right, Robert. We made it. Not the way we imagined, but we made it." For the first time in decades, my heart didn't ache when I said his name. It felt full. 3 months later, my life had settled into a new rhythm, quiet mornings, long walks, and the simple joy of watching the sunrise without anyone demanding my time. The beach house had become more than a place to live. It was proof that starting over isn't just for the young. Every creak in the floor, every chipped tile in the kitchen told a story I'd earned the right to keep. One Wednesday afternoon, the women from my book club came over. We shared tea, laughter, and stories that reminded me I wasn't alone in my experiences. One of them, Carol, told me her daughter had been pushing her to move closer to assisted living. She said, "After hearing what you did, I told her no. I'm not ready to give up my life just because it makes hers easier." That struck me deeply. I hadn't set out to make a statement. I only wanted to protect what I'd built. But hearing how my story gave someone else courage, that was worth more than any apology David could ever offer. A week later, Grace Chen and her husband invited me to dinner at their restaurant before retiring for good. When I walked in, they handed me a small jade plant. "For new beginnings," Grace said with a smile, "and strong roots." That little plant now sits on my bedroom windowsill, soaking in the morning light. Every time I water it, I'm reminded that strength isn't loud. It grows quietly, steady, consistent, alive. Sometimes I still think about David. I wonder if he ever rereads the letter I left in that safety deposit box, the one explaining why I did what I did. Maybe one day he'll understand that I wasn't choosing a house over him. I was choosing self-respect. But I don't wait for that day anymore. I've learned that love can't thrive where there's no respect, and peace doesn't come from pleasing everyone. It comes from finally valuing yourself the way you've valued others all your life. This house, this quiet stretch of sand, this slower pace, it all taught me something I wish I'd known decades earlier. You're never too old to draw boundaries. You're never too late to reclaim your life. When people see gray hair, they assume fragility. But there's a kind of strength that only comes from surviving, the strength to stand alone when it's easier to surrender, the courage to keep your head high when the world tells you to step aside. If you're watching this and you've ever been made to feel small by the very people you loved most, I want you to remember this: you are not a burden. You are the foundation they stand on. So don't let anyone push you out of the home, the peace, or the dignity you've earned. If this story spoke to you, tap that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because this isn't just my story, it's a reminder that we don't stop maturing when we grow older. We only grow stronger.